but we're very excited tonight to have Carol Cross with us. She is coming from Rochester, New York right now. Carol is the founder of the Susan B. Anthony, here we go, the Susan B. Anthony Birthplace Museum in Adams, Massachusetts. And as you heard, Lila is a docent there at the museum. So we're excited to have Lila with us as well. Carol is the recipient of the Northern Berkshire Professional Women's Association and it was just the it's the Restoration Award for the restoration of the Susan B. Anthony House. I knew I was going to mess that up, Carol. I'm sorry. I'm going to let you take it from here before I misspeak anymore. But Carol, thank you for joining us. Carol's got her assistant Carrie there in the background with her.
Hi there.
Say hi, Carrie.
Everybody.
Thank you for joining us as well. And you can go right ahead and start sharing your screen. And welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, people do get confused about my being in Rochester, New York. Of course, Rochester is where Susan B. Anthony lived her activist life, and she has a home here, beautifully restored, and a wonderful museum. So if you're ever in Rochester, don't miss going to the Susan B. Anthony House here in Rochester. The birthplace came up for sale at auction in 2006. It was literally falling apart. I will, show you a picture or two of the Birthplace Museum before we get into the postcards. But just to say that I'm so pleased to be here with all of you and sharing with you the book Vintage Tweets and the collection of postcards. I've collected postcards for the last 25 years or so. And I have in the suffrage theme, I have 650 of these. And it was good to be able to do them for the centennial, the 100th anniversary of suffrage, because this did not require, because of the postcards being in the public domain, I was not required to research the producer, the illustrator of the card, which would have taken ages and ages. There is the Tweets book is divided into different themes, and one of the themes is an artist theme. So some of the cards, of course, are so significant with the artists that are presented and illustrated there that they're in their own category. But because they, they fit that public domain, I was not required to do a lot of research. On the cards, if the cards have a message on the back of them, which is pertinent to the illustration on the front of the card, then I do mention what the card says on the back. And oftentimes they're kind of funny and cute. And so I do like to say what's on the cards in the back. But, we've done a number of these Zoom presentations, and because postcards were the way that the suffragists promoted their movement, it was the propaganda of their own movement, we can see through the cards what they said, how they said it, how they used ridicule and sarcasm, and how their opponents came back at them. So the presentation is a combination of sort of a yin yang of the suffrage movement. So I'll just kind of first show you before we get into the postcards, just to say that Susan B. Anthony's 200th birthday was in 2020. She was born in 1820. So 2020 was a huge year for the Birthplace Museum, not only celebrating the centennial of suffrage and the 19th Amendment that granted women the right to vote, but also Susan B. Anthony's 200th birthday. The Birthplace Museum, of course, these are not postcards. These are just pictures that I'm just going to start out a couple to show you the inside of the museum in Adams, Massachusetts, in the Berkshires. That's in the northwest corner of Massachusetts is where Adams is located. And the picture on the left is the room where Susan was born. And the picture on the right is an interior picture, of course, of Susan's father's store, which he operated out of the home. And so that's just a little bit of that. So to set the stage for the postcards, this is Susan at age 6, and she stands in front of the restored walk-in fireplace and hearth, which of course is the signature of Quaker life. And you are right to wonder how it is that we have a photograph of Susan B. Anthony when she was 6 years of age. That would have been in 1826. Well, this is actually not a photograph of her. It is a digital production by a group of people called Synthespian Studios. And that is, they're quite well known. They did the Amazing Adventures of Spider-Man and the Polar Express. They contributed to those cartoons. And so they created this image of Susan by regressing later images of her. And so here she is at age 6. Also, if you're wondering about the photograph, you would be right to wonder, because the Quakers would not have allowed their children to be photographed. This would be seen as prideful, or even themselves. They did not have a tin hanging in their house. They believed in the inner light, and that they were all people of God, and that it was prideful to show their own image. So this is the birthplace today after it's restored. And this next picture, of course, is where we'll start with the the postcards. This is the first postcard. And when we restored the birthplace, we had a couple iterations of this postcard. It was taken in 1902, or at least that's the postmark on the back of the card. And we learned, of course, where that door was on the side of the house. It hadn't been there after it was, used for other purposes for so many years. So we did put the door on the side of the house. We were able to kind of gather some of the architecture and the landscape around the house by looking at these old iterations of the postcards. The rural road in the shadow is Mount Greylock, and of course it's the highest peak in the state of Massachusetts. This postcard was probably 1902. Of course, Susan was still alive at that point, and she was very famous, obviously, prior to her death. This next postcard is Susan's mother, Elizabeth Reed, who gave birth to Susan on February 15th, 1820. And I was so delighted that Lyle Nyberg was kind enough to write to me today to remind me that Lucy Reed's grandmother, no, it would be Lucy Reed's mother, Susanna Richardson, was born in Scituate. So that was a very exciting little bit of information to share. Daniel on the left was a mill operator. He built, constructed, owned, and operated the first whole cloth textile mill in the Berkshires. He built the house where Susan lived, the picture that you had seen before, in 1817. Next postcard is the picture of the Quaker meeting house where Susan and her family worshiped. It still stands in nearly pristine condition today. And I'm always quick to point out that the men are on one side, they worshiped on one side of the building, and the women worshiped on another side of the building. Susan's aunt, her father, Daniel Anthony's sister, was actually a Quaker minister, and that was almost unheard of. But she certainly was a role model for Susan as she gained women's rights and reputation of her own. This next postcard is one of the photos that was Susan's first photo, and it was in 1845. I understand that the photography, I should know this from being from Rochester, New York, photography was made popular, was invented in 1839. You can see that Susan here has abandoned her Quaker garb, and she's wearing a plaid dress. She's a teacher here. And of course, this is one of the later images of Susan that was regressed in order to create the childhood image of Susan. One wonders what her Quaker parents thought of this photo, because again, they did not approve of photography or their own image being made public. Susan taught for less than 8 years, and she taught in Kanajahari, New York. And it was really her teaching career that shaped her activism for the next 60 years of her life. And like Anthony, early suffrage leaders were fueled by the temperance movement. And as a teacher, Anthony witnessed firsthand the effects of alcohol on her students. One of the themes that runs strong in the book that I put together is temperance, and it is so closely related to suffrage and the shaping of suffrage leaders. So these teachers understood the harmful effects of alcohol on students. Children were abused by fathers, and children were neglected by mothers who were abused by drunken husbands. This postcard, you can see, reads, "My boys may go to ruin through legalized saloon by your consent, but your boys never will be by my consent." So this is a teacher's statement in support of the children that she felt called to protect. Another in the temperance section, this card poignantly illustrates a school teacher's concern. A family's scant resources were spent to purchase liquor instead of children's shoes and books for school. Anthony joined the New York State Temperance League. But much to her naivete, she found that, you all know, women were not allowed to speak at these gatherings run by men. And so she, along with so many of the teachers, found an outlet for their concern in the Women's Christian Temperance Union. Besides concern for family welfare, the Women's Christian Temperance Union wanted more money for education that could come from taxes from the liquor industry. They wanted to prevent children from dying from the swill milk epidemic. I had no idea what that was until I did research for this particular theme, a suffrage theme. But the swill milk was unveiled in 1859 when many children in New York City were dying from cow's milk. And it was discovered that cow's milk that they were eating from whiskey mash, these cows' milk came from. So women very much wanted the vote. They felt that in order to protect children from visages like swill's milk, which actually was not taken care of until 1896, this whole time that they complained about this evil in their society. So it was the liquor industry that forced the women's voice, in order to advance family health in moral character in the home. They needed civic engagement. They needed the vote. Anthony's newspaper addressed vegetarianism and animal cruelty, but this is the only postcard that I have in the collection that actually addresses animal cruelty. It demonstrates that beasts of burden were left outside of saloons and were subject to the cruelties of the saloon industry. Also, women saw temperance as a method to temper or moderate male aggression in the marital bed. And so suffrage supported what was called voluntary motherhood, and control over family size was really directly tied, they believed, to liquor consumption. And it was not just liquor. Colorful characters like this one of Carrie Nation condemned cigarette smoking and added that to the ruination of young males. Carrie Nation cards are just abundant. Excuse me, she produced and created postcards like this to fund her own activism. She also she produced and sold small little hatchet jewelry. We actually have one in the museum, a small original hatchet, which is very exciting. And of course, she would sell those, and women would wear the hatchet to demonstrate their concern about temperance. Carrie, it's interesting, was from Kansas, and there's just so many characters from Kansas, and she was one of them. Carrie, she was married to a minister, a man who died, and the second man that she married was named Nation. She gave herself a middle initial of A, so she is Carrie a Nation, and she had that written on a number of her hatchets. Isn't that exciting? But the liquor industry took every opportunity to mock suffrage. And here you have them mocking them and showing suffragists drinking and smoking too. The liquor industry, they basically claimed that if women got the vote, they would devolve into the values and morals of men, is what they claimed. And many of the suffrage leaders, anti-suffrage leaders, were actually women. This particular postcard, I called attention to the sunflower behind Jean, your backdrop there. The sunflower is the suffrage flower. And the reason for that is because, again, it's Kansas. Kansas was the first state to grant municipal suffrage to women, and the state flower of Kansas is the sunflower. This card is very exciting because it is a leather card. It was made from deer hide, and they became popular in 1902. They were actually banned in 1909 when the newer postal machines could not cancel them. However, they were still sold for many years after that and coveted by handcrafters who stitched them together to make things like pillowcases and dresser scarves. And you can see around the edge of this postcard measured markings, and all of the suffrage or all of the leather postcards in the collection of my collection have these measured indentations around the side of different sorts. I've never found a pillowcase or a dresser scarf made with one of these, which I'm still looking. So besides voting rights for themselves, suffrage leaders participated in another major movement that was going to change the world. And that movement was a book was written about it in 1852, and I'm sure you all know what it was. It shocked the nation, and it's Harriet Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin. And here's his postcard of Uncle Tom. Uncle Tom was propelled by suffragists into connecting domestic and social morality. and made the demand for votes even more convincing. So temperance, abolition, and suffrage really proved to be an unstoppable triangulation, a mass movement of radical women bent on creating a better world. A civic dialogue ensued about property rights and whether a human being could be owned by another human being. And outside of the polarizing North and South was, yes, again, Kansas comes into fore, the home state of Carrie Nation's temperance movement, and the state that first granted women suffrage was the state where John Brown organized his army. And here we have John Brown. John Brown's youngest sibling, Merritt, became a member of John Brown's army. Now you can imagine how that shocked the family. It certainly shocked Susan because of her pacifist leanings, being a Quaker. As a matter of fact, during the Civil War, Susan refused to give enthusiastic support to the war. Lincoln, she felt, was very weak in the area of abolition. During the Civil War, women's suffrage activism was really put on hold for those years because women, of course, were concerned about their brothers, their fathers, their sons being in the war. But these cards really demonstrate how every movement, whether it was suffrage, prohibition, or abolition, appropriated Lincoln for their own cause. About suffrage, he says, it might be a little bit hard to read there, I believe in sharing in the privileges of government, by no means excluding women. Now that's a real lukewarm endorsement, but Anthony and her abolition colleagues clung to that and embraced Lincoln on that behalf. Susan stated that her cause was about human rights, not just women's rights. As a matter of fact, when her father, Daniel, died in 1862, Anthony chose Frederick Douglass to give the eulogy. And of course, this was unheard of. That kind of friendship was so uncommon, particularly prior to emancipation, but even after emancipation, it was very unusual to have that kind of a friendship. But despite her personal friendship, modern day scholars accuse suffragists, including Anthony, of racist leanings. And these accusations are not without merit. The museum, this particular postcard is, oh my goodness, it's Ida B. Wells. And Ida, you might remember, was very active in the anti-lynching movement. More popular at the turn of the 20th century. She visited Susan B. Anthony at her home here in Rochester. And the story is told that Ida needed something sewn, and Susan B. Anthony asked her seamstress to sew something for Ida. Her seamstress refused, and Susan B. Anthony fired her seamstress. So we do know that personally, Susan B. Anthony upheld the rights of African Americans. Of course, her very, very active strategies during abolition were staunch. However, the suffragists did have racist tendencies. This next postcard, well, this is an image. This one is actually not a postcard. This is a small pamphlet that is, it's actually in the museum, and I wanted to put it in here to demonstrate some of the racist tendencies. But you can see the hostility and anger on the left of the woman, the suffragist, saying, if he can vote, why can't I? And this whole racist division happened over the 15th Amendment. The 13th Amendment, just to refresh your memory, was the emancipation of the slave. The 14th Amendment made slaves, formerly enslaved people, citizens, and the 15th Amendment gave African Americans the right to vote. However, they did not give women the right to vote. And this caused a huge split in the suffrage movement. Susan B. Anthony was of the mind that it was all or nothing. It had to be for everyone, including women, as well as the African American formerly owned slaves. And others in Massachusetts, like Lucy Stone in particular, headed up the group that believed it was the Negro's hour. And we had to just honor and respect the 15th Amendment, despite the fact that it did not include women. That split lasted for 20 years. And this next postcard is a handmade postcard. There are some of the handmade ones, but it's a derogatory image of a Black woman, as you can see. And this, of course, is in the Birthplace Museum. We have had people very angry at us for showcasing the racism of the suffragists. But we remain strong in wanting to educate and telling as much as we can about the story. Certainly in no way excusing it, but just it's a historical fact. And so we stick with that. So this next postcard is of phrenology. And phrenology was the study that measures the bumps and crevices in the head. It's a parlor game like signature analysis. You all remember, many of you who are as old as I am remember signature analysis of the 1960s. But this was taken far more seriously. And Susan B. Anthony had her head read in 1852 and in 1892. But when she had her head read in 1852, she was not really a noteworthy figure. But the reading appeared to be futuristic and in its accuracy. I'm trying to go through my pages here. It says, oh no, that's the wrong page. I'm going to see if I can find it. Here we go. Thank you. It says Susan B. Anthony has not only a striking and impressive physique, she is both strong and fine. Her temperament would have been called by the old writers. Let's see. Let me read. Here we go. Let's read this one. Susan B. Anthony, you have a finely organized constitution and a good degree of compactness and power in your head. You always work with a will, a purpose, and a straightforwardness of mental action. You seldom accomplish ends by indirect means or circuitous routes, but unfurl your banner, take your position, and give fair warning of the course that you intend to pursue. You have mechanical ingenuity, the planning talent, and the minds of others are to be used as instruments to accomplish your objects. I have put this phrenology postcard with the racist postcards. And the reason why I've done that is because this was a way of sort of determining whether someone was smart or not smart. And women were perceived to be not as smart as men, and African Americans were perceived to be not as smart as white people. The picture at the top The man on the right is a diplomat, an English diplomat. The man on the left was an African man who was in prison. So it's kind of, you know, what category are you going to be in based on your head. So it was really a eugenic exercise. After the Civil War, Anthony published The Revolution, which was by far the most outspoken woman-run newspaper of its kind. It was it had a short duration, only from 1868 until the middle of May of 1870. The editor was none other than Anthony's colleague and her closest ally, Elizabeth Cady Stanton. And the motto of the paper was "Men their rights and nothing more, women their rights and nothing less." The inaugural edition of the paper had two policies, and these were portrayed on a number of postcards, but this first one, there was to be no standing armies. Suffragists supported less aggressive means to settle conflict. I mean, they wanted to bring men out of the bars and off the battlefield into the home where families could be nurtured. But for every postcard that proclaimed a good reason for suffrage, there was going to be its converse. And so here's a postcard. It's the anti-suffrage mockery. If women got the vote, they would only take up male-dominated values and fight wars too. And they would fight them in their high heels, as you can see. The second policy of the revolution is that there was going to be no advertisements for quack or immoral medicines, or what they called restalism, which is a derogatory word for abortion. Over 20 editorials in Anthony's newspaper, most written by Elizabeth Cady Stanton, condemned abortion using straightforward language like child murder or crime against humanity. Feticide and infanticide were interchangeable. In this particular postcard, it's one that is published by the Chicago Probation League when Jane Addams was at Hull House. Suffrage leaders believed that if women had the right to education and employment, injustices like poverty, abortion, and prostitution that destroyed children would be reduced. This next card is of Jane Addams herself. And as you may know, she was the first woman to receive the Nobel Peace Prize. She was known for her care and protection of immigrants in our country. She, strangely enough, the invention of the electric chair was in 1890 by Thomas Edison, and electric shock was proposed in Michigan state law, none other, as an abortion technique to be used on disabled children. Jane Addams deplored abortion. She deplored those who wanted to keep secretive certain births. And she said all children should be welcome no matter their disability, that abortion was not in line with the march of civilization or principles of humanity. The illustrator of this postcard is a very well-known person. Her name is Nina Allinger, and she was the designated cartoonist for The Suffragist, which is the magazine of the National Women's Party. And that was the party that was founded by Alice Paul. The statement, "Child saving is women's work," resonates boldly in many representations throughout the postcards. It connects the domestic sphere and the civic sphere, proclaiming that the woman's vote would strengthen motherhood and families. Allender, strangely enough, was the one who popularized the iconic donkey for Democrats and elephant for Republicans moniker. This push-pull of children and families, as I mentioned, is the theme of nearly 1/3 of the postcards. Anti-suffragists argued that children would suffer if women voted. The home would be abandoned, they said. But suffragists countered with postcards like this one that said that the domestic sphere would not be destroyed, that it would be enhanced, that women could do both. This next one, I want to show you the back of this card. This is so fun. The senders of cards were encouraged to maximize the exposure of the card's message by sending it on to another person, and then to another person, and to another person. Isn't this exciting? It's really the 19th century way to recycle or repurpose. It says, that fine print there says, if you are in sympathy with this message, affix another stamp, cross off the first recipient, and repost it. Is this exciting? And also, all of the postcards during the entire time of suffrage were 1 cent. The 2-cent postcard came into onto postcards around 1925. I was fortunate enough to visit the Smithsonian's U.S. Postal Museum. They actually did a story on the book, the postcard book that I put together. And I learned so much from them about the postcards themselves. It was very, very exciting. These next postcards are some of the more thoughtful expressions among the collection. And it's Anthony's National Women's Suffrage Association that sold these. Now, Anthony, again, she was the National Women's Suffrage Association. Lucy Stone from Massachusetts was with the American Women's Suffrage Association. One, Susan B. Anthony, demanded universal suffrage. Lucy said it was the Negro hour. You might recall, I mentioned that before. There are 18 of these in my collection. I understand there are 24 altogether. So I'm still on the lookout for more of these cards. But you can see that many of these cards make it clear that the domestic life and civil life was, after all, none other than the mother. Very, very poignant these cards are. Postcards often employ non-threatening images of children and animals to promote their message. The cards like these were sold at fairs and church festivals, municipal picnics, and at booths on street corners in New York City on Fifth Avenue, right outside where the Revolution was printed. Aren't these fun? These are so exciting. I love them. But these two sweet images display the innocence of children, making a statement about the virtuousness of their cause. They demonstrate how children were symbolic of nurturing and motherhood. Let me show you the back of these cards. This postcard was canceled 4 times. And it's not because it was one of the ones that suggested that you resend the card if you were in sympathy with the message. It actually was just something that was not uncommon. You can see that this card traveled from Reliance, Virginia on April 13th, 1906 at 4:30 p.m., showing 3 more cancellations on its way to Chambersburg, Pennsylvania, where it arrived on April 18th. And again, I learned from the U.S. Postal Museum staff people and why, that this was not uncommon. I also learned that people like myself who collect postcards are called deltiologists. I'm sure I'm mispronouncing this, but deltiologist is who we are. By the way, canceled cards were considered far more valuable and are considered far more valuable today. Well, that, first of all, you can be certain that way, the age of the card. And don't you just love the beautiful, what am I trying to say? The way that that's printed, calligraphy, thank you. Calligraphy is just beautiful. Oftentimes the postcards are written in pencil. They're very hard to read. There's multiple misspellings on postcards. The reverse of the postcards, I mentioned at the beginning of the program before it began to some of you, that if it pertained to the front of the card or to the image on the front of the card, I wrote it in the book. Like, some of the cards would say, is your wife one of these? So that would obviously pertain to suffrage. Other messages on the backs of the card would say, our tractor got stuck in the mud today, or we got our corn in today. Oftentimes they were simply happy birthday, but you have to remember that the telephone was not popularized back then. And so you would send a card the same way you would pick up the telephone. One of the cards said, "Mother is feeling better. Thank you for the soup." So it was just a way of saying hello to your neighbor. One theme in the book is a holiday theme of cards, and holidays were really opportunities to sell these items and raise money for the ever popular petition campaigns and suffrage parades. Valentines with their endearing cupids were really the favorites. There are some very beautiful, endearing postcards in the Valentine section. And so were leap year cards. 2 years that were leap year were 1908, 1912, smack right in the middle of the high stakes right to vote. 2020 was actually a leap year, and we made samples of this leap year collection into note cards. So that was kind of fun. We sold those. Yeah, very fun, very fun. But again, children and animals were used in propaganda by those who opposed women's suffrage, right? So like social media today, no other medium lent itself to exaggeration and ridicule like the hasty tweet of a 1-cent postcard, right? And then the women would come back and put men in their place. Don't you love this? Just great, just great. But here's one of Susan B. herself, and nothing was sacrosanct. Postcard caricatures of Anthony proliferate. They portray women as menacing and intimidating. Very popular to do that. The anti-suffrage cards claimed that women who engaged in politics were going to disrupt the family. Not only were children going to suffer, but fathers who were left to care for children were going to suffer even more. But it actually got worse. Male and female roles would be reversed. The domestic sphere and the civic sphere were going to be topsy-turvy. These are hands down everybody's favorite in the collection. These are Dunstan Weiler lithographs, and they're known by their bright edge to them. And they're just hysterical cards. There are 7, I have 7 in the series, and I understand there are 16 of these altogether. So I am still on the lookout. And by the way, my husband is very patient. You have to go through reams of ephemera paper that stuck up in somebody's attic for years before you might find, you might for a full weekend go through house sales and not find one. So it takes a lot of work. A lot of these were purchased on eBay. That's a little bit risky because you're not sure if they are reproductions if you purchase them on eBay. There were about 18 in the book that I put together that appeared to be reproductions. And so I identify those as reproductions, unlike the other ones in the book. There are about 400 in the book. So you want to find these yourself, right? More in the artist series. The artist here is Walter Wellman, and he's known for his soft greens and pinks. There are 16 in the full set of Walter Wellman's, and I have 13 of these. And Wellman predicted that there would be frilly senatoresses and overbearing judgettes if women got the vote. In horror of horror, women would take up pastimes like golf. I got this card in Billings, Montana, and the woman who sold it to me, I think it had a price tag of like $6, and she insisted on selling it to me for only $3 because it had all the writing on it. And I said, oh, that makes it much more valuable. I'm delighted to pay $6 for this card. But that was really fun to see the writing on the front of the card. While Susan B. Anthony, of course, she pledged her own life insurance to advance education for women here at the University of Rochester. But other women really feared disruption in the domestic sphere. They asserted that cheerleading was not useful knowledge. Yeah, very fun. And women who wanted economic rights, the anti-suffragists declared they already had them, right? But a significant revolution was actually going on that was even greater than Anthony's newspaper, and that was the bicycle. Anthony herself claimed that the bicycle represented women's freedom more than any other single domestic item. Now, this, I think, must be German. There is a section in the book of foreign postcards, but this one I put with the bicycle. Not only did this simple two-wheeled contraption propel women toward independence, it was a measure of her independence. You couldn't, you couldn't ride a cycle in a corset and 11 pounds of petticoats. So it led to dress reform. It also was a measure of her independence because she didn't need, a chaperone, right, to ride a bike. She could do this on her own. And I just love this. Isn't this hysterical? She is saying, is this the way to wear them? And he says, I don't know. My old gal wears them underneath. So here she is. Here's, the bloomer. This was much later than the bloomer. The bloomer was around 1850s, early 1860s. This card is probably in the 1890s. Susan B. Anthony, by the way, abandoned the bloomer very quickly. She called it, what did she call it? She called it her crucifixion. People were more interested in what she was wearing than in what she was saying. It was a distraction. And so she really stuck to traditional garment. But one of the things in the revolution that was very, very popular was dress reform in the Revolution. That was one of the topics that was discussed multiple times in the Revolution. And of course, as I said, you could go different places. She didn't need a chaperone. She could go where she pleased. This is another leather postcard from the leather theme. You can see the spaced markings on the edges, which makes it easier for the crafters. This the jocular exchange just goes on and on. It extends to other modes of transportation. Both sides added to the frivolity of the debate by quotes like this: women's suffrage was not a popular position among Democrats. Even Woodrow Wilson, who finally approved the 19th Amendment, did so without enthusiasm. There was a lot of discussion about the pants in the family, who was going to buy them, who was going to own them, who was going to wear them. But postcard propaganda was not all innocent. These representations are in a section called Violence in the book. Many of these hostile images in my collection were printed in Germany for the American market about 1917, right before we got into the war, World War I maintain, and I don't have anything to prove this, that they were likely produced and distributed by the American Brewers Association. It was one of the stronger beer producers who wanted to silence women who favored prohibition. And the German market was huge with the liquor industry. It is no surprise that the 19th Amendment was passed, the amendment that allowed suffrage, only after the Prohibition Amendment was passed. That was only months before. And so once the Prohibition Amendment passed, the liquor industry had no cause to continue to fight against suffrage. In this section, they ridiculed women who wanted the vote and claimed that, they really were not the nurturing gender, not at all, they said. This postcard is one from the foreign section, and in it displays the militancy of Great Britain's suffragettes. By the way, they called women in Great Britain suffragettes. In our country, we called them suffragists. And that was to make a statement that we were more serious. We were not children. We were not like majorettes. We were not coquettish and girlish. We were serious. And so we called ourselves suffragists. But the militancy of Great Britain was not really carried over, thankfully, to the American movement. When Alice Paul came to this country, she certainly engaged in nonviolence, but not in militant nonviolence. Her nonviolence was more, in hunger strikes and disrupting Woodrow Wilson's military parades. Other foreign cards in the section of the foreign postcards are from Italy, France, the Netherlands, Estonia, even Mexico. I put one here from, let's see. Yeah, this one is from Ireland. Don't you love it? I mean, it is March after all. So that one's fun. So as the news of violence spread through postal exchanges, so did the communication of those who used it. And it's very exciting to know that photography, the whole photography section in the postcard movement, it really became an asset to the cause in the years immediately prior to the passage of suffrage, because no longer were descriptions of rallies and parades left up to the biases of the newspapers. You know, there was fake news back then too. But now you could see for yourself the peacefulness of the parades. You could see the attendance of the parades. Very, very exciting. But again, humor proliferated here. Men are in drag and they're purporting to be a women's baseball team. And they claim that men use their lefts to fight women's rights. If you can read some of that, very fun. Isn't that hysterical? You'll love it. But Anthony could never, ever have imagined that her photo would travel all over the world. I wonder what her mother would say. Truly, failure is impossible. And this is the last of the postcard that I'm showing you this evening. There are some others of Anthony, of course, in the book, which here is a little bit of promo on the book. But you can see, yeah, so there you are. I think we can, you want to bring me on if you, yeah. Okay, here we are.
Carol, that was wonderful. Some of those, like you said, were hysterical. They were, what a good insight into the whole movement. Does anyone have any questions? Comments, questions? Lucille, I know you must, you always do.
I just want to make a comment. It's amazing, Carol. You're really wealth of knowledge in depth, and it's very comprehensive.
Yep.
Amazing. I've read a lot about this, and you really took it even more. I don't know how you do it, but it's fantastic.
Thank you. Thank you.
It's amazing what you can learn from a postcard.
Yes. And I think it's good because, you know, this is what their images are, right? I mean, I could talk to you all day, but if you see what they're saying, right? Yeah. I like the idea of their own images, their own way of describing their movement and their own way of strategizing of how to counter attacks against them. I thought was very creative the way that they did that.
I have a question about time, the time frame. I mean, how many years, you know, did the actual effort take place?
Mm-hmm. The suffrage effort did not actually begin in Seneca Falls in 1848. It began before that, but that's when it was really made public, in 1848 in Seneca Falls.
Okay.
And so it was a good long, what would that be? 75 years, 70 years.
Imagine.
73 years. Yes, that's right. The railroad had an awful lot to do with the advancement of communication, as you all know. So, the postcards were able to be utilized. The paper industry, the growth of the paper industry, and the railroad really just propelled the movement, propelled, certainly suffrage, propelled temperance. So yeah, it had a lot to do with it. The oldest card that I have is about 1871.
Oh.
Yeah, and that's quite old.
Yeah.
And most of the cards are in the very late 19th century, early 20th century.
Okay. Wow. Thank you. It was amazing how hard they fought for this, right? I mean, what effort went into it? We're so fortunate today that it's here. You know, they did the legwork.
That's right.
Thank you very much. I love the cards. Fantastic. Thank you. Thanks, Jean, for putting this together.
You're welcome.
You can take a look.
Sorry.
just was
Go ahead,
wondering,
Jody.
was the first women's conference in Worcester, Massachusetts?
Right, 1851, you're right. That was the first one in Massachusetts, certainly. It
Mhm,
followed the Seneca Falls in 1848,
mhm.
and they had them every 2 years.
Okay.
Yeah,
My question is on the 19th Amendment. Didn't that pass by one vote? I was very close. I can't remember whether it's one vote or, just a very, very tight vote on that. Does
Is
anyone
this-
have an answer to that?
was the senator from Tennessee.
Mhm.
His
So that was-
mother,
And
his
we're
mother-
still fighting some of those same battles.
we
Yeah.
sure are.
Equal pay for a good example. And of course, fighting for voting rights is taking place all over the country now too. The representation.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
I'm curious what you all think about the objects that demonstrate racism. Are any of you offended, or do you have an opinion that they should be in the museum, should not be in the
I think
museum?
it's important to remind people how closely tied all these things are. And I know there's been criticism of the women's movement because they did not include Black women in that 19th Amendment. But considering it passed by only one vote, they probably would not have gotten it if they had included Black women.
Very interesting that you should say that.
Mm.
I think you're right. That's almost a for certain. But well, of course, Black women were included, but
Mm.
there were all sorts of strategies to exclude them.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, I think it's important for people to realize how pervasive racism has been in our society.
Mhm. It says, so we have a little question here. I mean, Emily Gina, is it all right if I read that question?
Yes, go right ahead.
It says, do you plan to do another book with postcards? Thank you. Probably not. Actually, I put my favorite ones in this collection. I could do another one though. There were a lot that I didn't put in that I could have. I have I don't know if I told you, I have 650 altogether. So yeah, and I really do want to complete those artist series and continue to look for them. There's a woman active with the Susan B. Anthony Birthplace Museum who has done a lot of shopping on eBay, and we do a lot of comparison to make sure that they're actually originals. So she helps me. So I may be able to complete those artist series ones. So that would be really fun if I was able to do that.
So I have put over in the chat the link to Carol's website so that you can purchase that book if you are interested. I know my connection's a little wonky here, so I may be going in and out. But in the chat, if you scroll up, you'll see the link if you are interested. And also for those of you who came in a little late, we have Layla, who is on the call with us, and she is actually a docent at the Susan B. Anthony Birthplace Museum. So I didn't know if she minded coming on screen and just telling us a little bit about where it's located, the hours, how we can get there, and if we get to meet you while we're there.
Leela.
Hi.
Leela, I'm sorry.
That's okay. That's fine. I haven't done doceting in a while because we have a really great young man, Marty Lohman, who does the docent now, and he is just absolutely fabulous. Everybody that comes just praises his work. I am at the museum when it's open, so you would be able to meet me and we could talk. The museum is open from Friday through Sunday from 10 to 4. And that's up until Memorial Day. And then we'll be open for the summer hours, Thursday through Monday. And it'll be the same 10 to 4. So it's located at 67 East Road in Adams, Massachusetts. I'm not sure what else.
Well, it's a little, it's not on the, it's outside of a very small town. You know, so it's
It's on a back road,
Yeah.
more or less.
right.
Yeah.
And we are.
If you go on to our website, they actually have good directions on how to get there, because sometimes the GPS will take people off on different back roads and they have a hard time getting there. But I've heard people say that the directions on our website are very good.
Thank you for that, Leela. There also, we are always looking for interns, volunteers. I know you're far across the state, but our intern program is very, very exciting. There are occasions when our interns do get credit for working at the museum. Our stories on our interns are just phenomenal. We have an intern who did get a job at the Smithsonian after being an intern at our museum. But we had one, for instance, a young woman from Williams College. She was an artist, and you know, we just couldn't figure out quite what to do with an artist. You know, we know what to do with a history major, a museum studies major, marketing major, but not an artist. And so she came up with her own project, which is always the best idea. If the intern can come up with their own project, they know what they can do and what they would like to do that's related and would be mutually beneficial. She suggested to create vignettes of Susan at age 6 when she lived at the house. And these continue to this day. They're propped outside. They're little life-size young girls outside. One is down at the creek, which is behind the house, behind the birthplace. She's carrying a bucket. Another image of Susan, little statuette, is sitting on a tree log reading a book. Another one is in the garden collecting sunflowers. And every one of those images lends itself to a story about Susan. So our docent begins the tour outside the birthplace. And as you go in, you can you feel and you can witness how Susan lived there. So our stories about our docents and our interns are just so delightful, so delightful. And I actually give credit to, in the book, in the credits, I give 2 young women from Holy Cross who worked at the birthplace. They did an awful lot with the postcards. They actually had an exhibit of the postcards, laid them out, designed them, and did a little program on them as part of their own internship. So I used much of their research and the way that they had divided the postcards and arranged them into themes. So that was very fun. So just FYI, if anyone knows of someone in college who is interested, send them to us.
That sounds great. Anybody else? Any questions? Comments? I think is in the chat as well. So if anybody wants to check that out. I think I'm going in and out. You're probably having trouble hearing me right now. So I apologize for that. So if anybody doesn't have another question, I guess we will wrap up tonight's presentation. Carol, this was wonderful. And I'm so glad we were able to make the connection with you, and you had that connection with Scituate, which was wonderful.
Thanks to Lyle Heiberg by the way, who
Yep.
pointed that connection out to me, reminded me of that connection. I don't know if
Yep.
you're on, Lyle. But,
I don't think Lyle got on the call tonight.
okay.
Yeah, that was fascinating, that link to Scituate, I thought. Yeah. I'll have to check with my daughter. She's doing the formatting for Lyle's books, so.
Oh, wow.
And we do have on our board, 3 members of the extended of the ancestral family. And we have an honorary board of Anthony family descendants.
Wow.
We're up to about 23 people, I think, on that board. So that's kind of fun. you know?
Yeah, that would be
Awesome.
good.
Impressive.
Yes. Thank you.
That's great.
Thank you. Thank you so
It's
much.
been wonderful.
Great.
Thank you.
Loved it. Loved it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you
And
so much.
as I said, we'll have the video probably tomorrow. It'll go up on our Facebook page. Carol and Carrie, I'll send that along to you. And, if I'm up there in the Rochester area visiting my boys, I would love to get together with you and actually meet in person.
Oh, that would be wonderful. And I can take you to the Susan B. Anthony House here in Rochester.
Oh, that'd be wonderful.
Yes. Yeah. And I don't know if I did mention that, we did, when we restored the house, it took about 3.5 years, the
Wow.
birthplace. And I knew how to do it because I live in a home that is on the historic registry, and it's almost identical. It is a Quaker Federal. The house I live in is 1825. Hers was built and finished in 1817 by her father, of course. So that's kind of just a little tidbit of information. So yeah, but it's a beautiful drive. Everybody knows the Berkshires. You all know Mount Greylock. So it would be a wonderful Sunday afternoon, a long Sunday afternoon to go and come back from Scituate. So
Oh, I think it would be beautiful.
thank you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. Thank
Thank
you,
you.
everyone, for joining us.
Thank you.
And have a wonderful evening. And Carrie, I will get that video out to you as soon as I get it.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so
All
much.
right, thank you.
So much.
Good night, everyone.
Night.
Bye-bye.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.